We spend a lot of time talking about the difference between authentic writing and school writing in our English class. As you know, much of what we do is focused around authentic writing, where you choose the topic and the style of writing and the audience, and you go through the writing process and you make all of the decisions the way that writers in the real world would. But there is a place for school writing. And you'll need to do a lot of it over your years as a student. So we're going to go over the academic essay today. At its core, an essay is an argument. It has a thesis, it is supported by evidence, examples, quotes, statistics, and you explain in your essay, in your body, how these examples, how this evidence proves what you're saying is true, what your thesis is. When we talk about writing an essay in school, it's usually the academic or school essay that we're thinking of. There are essays outside of schools as well. Editorials are a form of essay. There are personal essays. So there is what I would call authentic writing in the form of an essay, as well as this academic form of essay writing. Basically, an essay has an introduction that hooks the audience in, makes them want to read the piece. The introduction identifies the thesis and the main points that are going to be used to support it. It has a body, which is where the bulk of the writing occurs. This is where the writer of the essay makes the main points that prove the thesis and supports those with carefully chosen evidence and explanation, and it ends with the conclusion. No new information, but rather it summarizes what has been previously said and reminds the reader of the argument that is being made. The difference between academic and non-academic essays is fairly simple. One is the format. Academic essays have a fairly defined format in terms of the structure, whereas non-academic essays tend to be a little bit more fluid in terms of the paragraphs, paragraph lengths, although both have an introduction, body, and conclusion in general. Academic essays, you avoid the use of I or any personal opinions, whereas non-academic essays will often use both I and personal opinions. And I should note that when I'm talking about personal opinions, I'm talking about ones that you express as personal opinions. Ultimately, any essay is your opinion about whatever it is that you're writing about. The difference is that in academic essays, usually you don't actually state it as an opinion, you state it as a fact, which you will then prove with your evidence. Academic essays are often taught as the 5-paragraph essay, particularly in younger grades, although it's not acted to that length. Non-academic essays often are longer, but it depends on the topic and the style of the essay. And of course, in both cases, it depends on the length. So the general structure of an introduction, it goes from the more general to the more specific. You start with your hook, you introduce the main topics that you're going to use to prove your argument, and then you state your argument in the form of a thesis. Your hook is often a question, a saying, it might be an interesting or shocking statistic, but its goal is to make the reader curious and engaged and wanting to read more. The main topics, usually you've got about 1 sentence per body paragraph that identifies the main idea in that paragraph. These are the things that you're going to use to prove the thesis. Using transition words helps show the connections between these ideas. And your introduction generally ends with your thesis, which is the formal statement of what the essay will prove. It's the central thread that ties everything together. Everything in your essay should prove your thesis. The body paragraphs, the structure of the body paragraphs is pretty much similar to any paragraph you've ever written. You have a topic sentence, which is your main argument or topic for the paragraph. In an essay, it should be what you're using to prove the thesis. You have your evidence and then your interpretation of that evidence, the points that you have to support the topic sentence, and then you interpret those points in terms of what you're trying to argue. And then you have a concluding sentence and a transition to the next paragraph. Your topic sentence is always the main idea for the paragraph. Use transition words and phrases, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, to help make clear the connections between the paragraphs. This is one of the ways, one of the major ideas that you're using to support and prove your thesis. And it shouldn't be stated exactly the same as you did in the introduction. Your evidence and interpretation is the support that you're providing. This is helping prove the topic sentence, which then helps prove the thesis. Your evidence is basically your proof, your quotes, statistics, descriptions, etc. And then you interpret that evidence, how that evidence proves the point that you're trying to make. Your body paragraphs end with a concluding sentence and a transition to the next paragraph. They shouldn't include a quote or new information. Your basic structure for the conclusion goes from the specific to the more general. You start with your restated thesis, the same idea, the same main argument for the entire essay, but in different words. Then you go into a summary of the main topics, the main points that you've made in your essay, and you end with a release, a concluding sentence that provides closure for your reader. It's really important when you look at your thesis statement in the conclusion that it's not exactly the same as in your introduction. You want to be summarizing that same idea, but in different words. Likewise, with the main topics, you don't want to use the same words as in the introduction or in the topic sentences. You want to remind the reader of what you did, what you said that proved the thesis. Your conclusion should have no new information. Everything that you're saying in your conclusion should be summarizing the main points that you're doing. Your conclusion basically is reminding your reader of what you said. And then your release is basically your final thought. It helps the reader feel a sense of closure to the essay. You might demonstrate the importance of your argument or leave your reader with something to think about. Transition words and phrases are really important in terms of building organization and structure into not just the essay as a whole, but also each individual paragraph. There are different types of transition words. There are transitions of sequence or order, like first or finally, in addition, ultimately. There are transitions of similarity, likewise, also in the same way. There are transitions of contrast, however, on the other hand, notwithstanding. Examples, for instance, to illustrate specifically, emphasis, even, indeed, of course, truly, transitions of cause and effect, accordingly, therefore, consequently, and transitions of addition, where you're adding more information, additionally, as well, furthermore, moreover. These are only a few examples. There are many, many different transition words and phrases, and a quick Google search will come up with a rather large number of them. A literary analysis essay is a particular type of academic essay. It carefully and thoroughly examines one or more texts by breaking them down into their components so that you can better understand them. Some common literary analysis essays may look at character studies, how an author develops a character throughout the course of a text. You may look at the structure of a text, looking at how that structure relates to the content that the text is conveying. You might examine the plot, look at the relationship between the main plot and a subplot, or how the plot is developed. A lot of literary analysis essays are related to theme, examining the message of a text and how that message was shared. Some literary analysis essays may be cultural or historical studies, looking at a particular text or texts and how they illustrate or give you more information about a particular culture or about a particular historical period. And another very common literary analysis essay topic is a close reading, where you take a passage from a text and you look at it really closely at like the most minute, smallest details that maybe you would otherwise gloss over. And you use what you learn and what you understand about the choices the author is making to better understand the text as a whole. These are just some examples of questions that would be literary analysis topics. How does an author use the elements of a story within a particular genre to engage their reader and convey a message? How does the text illustrate a particular culture or historical period, helping the audience to a fuller understanding of it? How does the development of a particular character in the text help emphasize the message that the author is sending? In what ways could you see that the setting acts as a character in this text? Identify a significant symbol in the text, something like maybe light or love or rainbows. How does that symbol play out throughout the story? What's the theme of the text, and how does the author show us this? How important is it to understand the historical and personal context in which the author was writing when it comes to understanding and interpreting a text? Some final reminders. In academic writing, you don't use I. You should never say in this essay or paragraph I am going to, or this essay or paragraph will prove, or anything like that. Just do it. Say your argument rather than saying I will argue this. In general, you avoid you as well, although there are some instances where it might fit into what you're writing. You want to make sure that your introduction and your conclusion do not have any evidence or specific examples. They should be general statements. Your conclusion shouldn't include any new information. Make sure that you're using formal English, not conversational, casual language. You shouldn't have any slang. Make sure that you're using full words rather than text speak. Use transition words and phrases to make connections between ideas within paragraphs, but also between paragraphs themselves. And everything you write, everything that's in that essay, should be aimed at proving the accuracy of your thesis.